perhaps 4,000 years, the Indian elephant has had a close and colorful relationship with man. They have been used as the carriage of state for kings and maharajas. They have gone to war as the most powerful fighting machines of their time. And, until quite recently, they provided the only heavy lifting equipment available for many enterprises, especially logging. The African elephant has always been another story. Bigger, heavier, and perhaps fiercer, it has generally been said to be untamable. Even today, well-informed naturalists often state that the African species has never been domesticated and that it is impossible. This is the story of an almost unheard of place where long ago they achieved the impossible. Garamba. At almost the exact geographical center of Africa, on the northern edge of the Great Zaire rainforests, the trees start to give way to grassland. Slowly at first, and then faster, the ratio of trees to grass changes. And here, on these sweeping savannas, is the Garamba National Park. These northern grasslands that stretch from Uganda to Senegal were once characterized by great herds of Africa's largest animals. These numbers are now found only in Garamba, and paradoxically, one of the reasons why wild elephants have survived here is that for almost 100 years, Garamba has been home to the continent's only tame ones. Garamba is also home to the world's last herd of northern white rhinos, 8,000 wild elephants, and over 3,000 hippos. But the park's claim to fame are these domesticated elephants. They are the bearers of 100 years of tradition, the survivors of 30 years of chaos, and to ride them through this wild place is a unique adventure. Today, there are only 3 fully trained elephants. At one time, there were over 100. A century ago, Central Africa was one of the last great blanks on the map of the world. Much of that unexplored land was owned personally by the King of Belgium, and on a whim, he set up a station to train these great animals. The progress of the operation was hidden deep in the heart of darkness, but it was a great success. And by the 1930s, when this film was made, it was the pride of the Belgian Congo. In those days, elephant capture was terrifyingly simple. A team of 15 Africans would chase a herd on foot, isolate a youngster, lasso it, and drag it to a standstill. They went for quite large animals. Smaller ones are easier, but they grow slowly, and it is years before they can do heavy work. About 2 meters high is the best size. It was as dangerous as it looks. In the capture of some 200 elephants, spread over 70 years, 50 men lost their lives. tied up and tired out, the elephant now has to be taken back to base, sometimes as much as 30 miles away. 2 old cows, specially trained and known as monitors, are brought forward. Sandwiching the distraught animal, their caressing trunks and pressing bodies have an immediate calming effect. Roped between the monitors, the calf can be gently led away. Within 6 months, it will be carrying a man and doing light work. So, for nearly 100 years, African elephants have been successfully domesticated. But that's in modern times. The story actually started over 2,000 years ago. Here, carved on a temple in Meroe, the ancient kingdom of Kush, now the Sudan, several slaves and an elephant are readied for their journey up to the Mediterranean. Around 300 years BC, the Roman supply of Indian elephants was cut off, so they turned to Africa. For the next 13 centuries, expeditions plundered the Upper Nile, bringing back many types of animal. Meroe was 1,200 miles from Rome, so a chain of at least a dozen ports were built down the Red Sea, and special ships constructed to carry this extra heavy cargo. The elephants were in demand for ceremonials and parades, but sadly, the main use to which these gentle giants were put was warfare. The battles must have been unbelievable chaos. The elephants' main job was to terrify the enemy horses and to flatten their fortifications, and they were known as the breakers of walls. 2,000 years ago, these were the tanks, and like tanks, they had their weak spots. They were easily disabled by scattering metal spikes which stuck in their feet. In 218 BC, the great Carthaginian general Hannibal set out to attack Rome with a huge army that included some 40 African elephants. He's remembered for his legendary crossing of the Alps, when he took that army over a snow-covered 10,000-foot pass and down into Italy. Over 20,000 men perished in that 2-week journey. How many elephants were lost is not recorded. Less remembered, but equally amazing, was his crossing of the Rhone River. At this point, about a half a mile wide. The elephants were led onto huge rafts and paddled across the river against heavy opposition from the other bank. Most of the elephants jumped ship halfway across. They were good swimmers and none were lost, but many of the boatmen were drowned. The last recorded use of African elephants was by Mark Antony in 43 BC. For the next 1,800 years, there is no mention of domestication, and the knowledge and methods died out along with the ancient kingdoms of the Nile. No longer captured and taken off to war, the great herds were left in peace. Then, in 1879, King Leopold of Belgium had a cunning plan and financed one of the strangest ventures Africa has ever seen. Later that year, 4 Indian elephants and their mahouts arrived from Bombay off the coast of what is now Tanzania. The plan was to march them 1,500 miles into the almost unknown heart of the continent, and there use them to train the local people and elephants. For the Africans on the coast, it must have been an incredible day. In 1879, Central Africa was a terrifying place. Slave raiders kept the tribes in a state of turmoil. Wild animals and disease were rampant. It was not a great time for a technology transfer of this sort. Despite all this, 6 months later, they made a triumphant entry into Tabora, an Arab slaving center 400 miles from the sea. But this was to be the high point of the expedition. 2 elephants had already been lost to disease, a third died soon after, and just a year after leaving the coast, the last elephant, the old leading cow, started to refuse her food. A special shelter was built for her, but in that alien place, surrounded by strange people and animals, she pined away and died, so the Mahout said, of sadness. Shortly thereafter, the expedition leaders were killed by tribesmen. But the loss of men and animals deterred King Leopold no more than it had Hannibal. 5 years later, men arrived on these great grasslands in the north of the Belgian Congo with simple, regal instructions: catch some African elephants and domesticate them. The chosen men were a special breed, aristocratic military officers, mostly from cavalry regiments, accustomed to commanding tough men in rough places. The whole operation was run along military lines, and despite their lack of experience, by the 1920s, there were 40 fully trained elephants, as tractable and hard-working as any in India. By the end of the 30s, 120 elephants were at work. The whole operation was a tremendous success. They provided a local transport system. They cleared the woodlands for plantations. In tests against the newfangled tractors, they worked out at 1/10 of the cost. But the machines were improving. By the 1950s, their light hidden under the bushel of the Congo forests, the elephants of Garamba were an anachronism. Out of sight, out of date, and out of work. But a far greater threat than idleness lay just over the horizon. In 1960, the Belgian Congo celebrated its independence. Within months, the army mutinied, and this beautiful country went up in flames. An old elephant mahout, Mbinza, tells his story to the park warden's children.
There was much fighting everywhere between the army and the rebels, who called themselves Simbas. One day we heard that the Simbas were coming here and that they were going to shoot all our elephants. We loved the elephants and were proud of our work, so we decided to hide them across the river in the park. Even I was frightened. Some of us took guns and we faced the Simbas. We threatened them and delayed them while the others collected all the elephants and took them away. We took them across the river where the tracks could not follow. It was a dangerous thing to do, but I was young then.
Not just young, but courageous. What the Mahouts did was amazing. Gathering up 23 elephants that were close to the station, they grabbed some supplies and headed out into the park. Elephants are not exactly the transport of choice for a quick getaway. But they did have one advantage. They could cross the swollen Dungu River. Once across the river, they could not be followed and could hide in the vastness of the national park. For 8 months, the mahouts hid the elephants in the park, chaining them to trees every night and moving them every few days. Without their bravery, the history of the training station would have ended, like so much in the Congo, in blood. Now the country, the national park, and the elephants went into a long, bleak period of decline and stagnancy. The Kornaks grew old and lost much of their knowledge and confidence in handling the animals. For the elephants, there was nothing to do. Old age, accidents, and disease slowly reduced their numbers. Land, once plowed by teams of elephants, was now tilled with hoes. The roads went back to bush. The bridges collapsed. The plows rusted in the long grass, and the elephants became uncooperative and dangerous. The park and elephant training station was so far away from the political and population centers that for many years they escaped further unrest, but they were crumbling away. The elephants' daily bathe in the river was the only sign of continuity. Across the river, the wild elephants in the park were left in peace, and for the next 25 years, the land settled back to what it had always been, a vast tract of untamed Africa, subject only to the timeless cycle of the seasons. And for Garamba, the most important season is the time of the fires. These long grass savannas stretch across a huge chunk of Central Africa, a 250,000 square miles, and fire is an important element in their existence. The carmine bee-eater is one of the many species of birds that follow the fires, foraging for insects flushed by the flames. Only birds and fish are safe from these fast-moving walls of fire. The grass gets to 8 feet high, and after desiccating for months in the dry season, it is almost explosive. With strong winds behind them, the flames could easily engulf even elephants. Regurgitating water from their stomachs and squirting it over their backs for cooling, they head for the nearest valley and cross the swamp to safety. The hippos are safe in the river. So is the Egyptian goose and her goslings. But safety is always a relative thing. Hippos would not normally attack the geese, but made nervous by the flames and forced into this proximity, one might make an annoyed snap. Fires keep these grasslands as grasslands in a couple of ways. Firstly, they make it very difficult for young trees and shrubs to grow. And by stealing nutrients from the soil, they make it more suitable for grass. Instead of breaking down slowly and being returned to the earth, all the minerals locked up in the vegetation are swiftly turned to ash. In the next few days, much of it blows away, robbing the earth of hundreds of tons of nutrients. The impoverished soil supports little except more grass, so producing a pattern of open country dotted with isolated, fire-resistant trees. It is hard to believe what a change 2 weeks of rain will bring. In 3 months, the elephants will be almost hidden in grass 8 feet high. Many young trees come up with the rains, but the elephants search them out, and one animal will eat hundreds in a day. So, between the elephants and the fires, the distinctive vegetation pattern of the Garamba savanna is maintained. Somehow, during almost 25 years of general breakdown and unrest, all this survived. 5,000 elephant, 3,000 hippos, 35,000 buffaloes, and also some 1,300 northern white rhino. Though fearsome looking, these are gentle animals, shy short-sighted, and easy to approach. With horns worth thousands of dollars, it was white rhino that brought the poachers to Garamba. In the 70s, 90% of the rhinos and many elephants were killed. The animals and the park were dying. At about this time, help arrived in the petite form of Kes Hillman, a young English zoologist. She visited Garamba whilst doing a survey of the northern white rhino, saw what was happening there, and decided she would do something about it. She had arrived just in time. It took Kes Hillman 4 years to gather support from the Worldwide Fund for Nature and the Frankfurt Zoological Society for a project to rescue Garamba. By the time she returned in 1984, the rhino population was down to just 15 animals. The number of domesticated elephants had dwindled to 4 old females. There was work to do. Under this huge tree, at the most beautiful spot in the park, she got married to a South African game warden, Fraser Smith. Two children, Chulu and Dungu, soon followed. A Zairian zoologist, Dr. Umbaima Atalia, joined the team to lead the research work. Fraser was to work on the huge task of rebuilding the park. His partner would be the chief park warden, Muhindo Messi, a tough customer with years of field experience. Others would take part over the years, but these 4 were to be the main players in the saving of Garamba and its domesticated elephants. One of the first decisions was that some young elephants should be captured and trained, while the last few men and elephants who knew how it was done were still alive. With a modern dart gun and drugs, it was all a lot less exciting and traumatic than the old way. The elephants simply ran off, soon leaving the drugged youngster behind. Thanks to the field vet for the Wildlife Conservation Society, Dr. Billy Karish, the operation went smoothly. Elephants are wonderfully caring animals. When this one comes round, she will have an instant friend to comfort her. Within a couple of weeks, she had also made friends with Gode, her keeper, and discovered that there is nothing in the world quite as good as mangoes. Argument rages as to whether wild animals should be exploited in this way. The park's position is that their only hope of raising revenue is from tourism, and the main attraction is their riding elephants. If this handful of captive animals can be the means of safeguarding the entire park, it is an argument that is difficult to refute. Meanwhile, Garamba needed rebuilding. To make a road in a place like this, you first drive a tractor cross-country to where you want to go. The faint tracks are then followed by a gang of men with hoes. So far, with this back-breaking method, they have put in over 200 miles. But sometimes the road has to cross a river, and every year the rivers flood. Bridges are expensive, so Fraser put in low-level crossings to use in the dry season and ferries to use in the rains. Out in the park, a chain of patrol posts had to be built. Construction usually started before the roads got there, so a team on foot would make a rough airstrip, and every sack of cement had to be flown in. Meanwhile, the elephant training was coming along well. An old mahout, Manyagba, worked with the young elephants, getting them used to carrying a man and to the basic commands of up and down, stop and go. Again, unlike the harsh methods of the past, this was all done with mangoes and kindness. At the same time, after years of neglect, the old elephant females too began a retraining program. Finally, in a poacher fire and lightning-proof house on the top of the park's highest hill, a relay system was set up, giving full radio coverage over most of the park. Garamba was finally getting back on its feet. While all this was happening, Kes, together with Mbaima, continued their research on the northern white rhino, and with the counting and monitoring of all the other inhabitants of the park. Their regular flights slowly built up a picture of animal distribution and numbers, vegetation changes, the effects of fire and poaching, and all the other information necessary for the managing of the park. Since the arrival of Kes's plane, and a bigger one provided by Frankfurt Zoo, not a single rhino has been poached. The aircraft were invaluable for checking on the rhinos, but for more detailed studies, a better means of transport was available. After 25 years in mothballs, the elephants had forgotten a lot of their training, but they were now put to work again and provided a great way to get close to the shy but short-sighted rhinos. The white rhinos responded well to protection. Their numbers have doubled, but they are still the rarest large animal on Earth. One aspect of Kes and Mbaima's research concerns a threat to the future of these animals. For while poaching is now mostly under control, there is still a hidden danger for this new calf. With such small numbers, there is a possibility of inbreeding that could weaken the stock. To check on this and the relationship of the rhinos to each other, Dr. Billy Carish came back to help. The rhinos run off, slightly puzzled perhaps, but unhurt and none the worse for the experience. The dart has fallen to the grass. It looks like a failure, but that is what was meant to happen. The idea was not to drug the animals. They simply needed a small tissue sample to make DNA tests for the animal's identity. A specially designed dart with a tip like a tiny apple corer cuts a little plug of skin from the rhino, enough for all the tests they need. While the scientists were looking at this potential threat, Fraser and Mahindo were dealing with a very real and ever-present danger. Civil war in the neighboring Sudan has brought an influx of armed and hungry men into the area, and poaching is on the rise again. Everyone's dread is that one day a sack like this may contain a rhino horn. The rangers are bush-hardened men, but the poachers are tough too, and they have a head start. The rangers are unlikely to catch up. Mahindo tries to cut them off. And with Fraser showing the way through the long grass, he almost makes it. But then a ravine cuts him off. Fraser can keep them on target, but the rangers are losing ground. Tired and frustrated, the rangers straggle back to rendezvous at the camp. This was the biggest poaching camp they'd found in the park. Row upon row of smoking racks covered with the meat of at least a dozen animals: hippo, antelope, and buffalo. Most of the poaching is for meat, but the Sudanese are well armed and many have had military training. If the demand for ivory and rhino horn returns, the battle could hot up in the future. Apart from a few pots and pans and the meat, the poachers have lost nothing. They will probably be back. A week later, one of Mahindo's patrol posts was burned down. It was newly built and still unoccupied. The attack was an unwelcome escalation in the ongoing war. Investigations later showed that this was done by poachers from over the border. But many of the local people who live around the edges of Garamba like a little meat in their diet too. Rather than chase them out or put them in jail, the parks are trying to improve relations with these people, whose goodwill is so important to their future. Ideally, this would take the form of services like schools and clinics paid for by sharing of the park revenues. But with the present political situation in the country and the difficulty in simply getting to Garamba, there are very few tourists, so very little revenue to share. No money for compensation for crops damaged by park animals or to give any benefits to the park's human neighbors. Unless and until that situation can be changed, it is difficult to see very far in Zaire. The park is a bit ragged still, but it's in better shape than it's been for decades. There are roads and communications, a proper infrastructure, and poaching is being held at bay. Best of all, the old elephants have been rescued from their chains and retrained. The 100-year-old traditions of this unique place are carrying on. This cow, Luero, was captured in 1952, so she is about 45 years old. She is a monitor, a senior guide elephant used to calm down newly captured animals. This is Kiko. She was born in captivity 40 years ago. Of the two young elephants captured, one ran away and joined a wild herd. This one, Lungunya, is learning fast. Lukutu was captured in 1957, so she is probably also 40. Despite neglect and a lack of routine and discipline for nearly half their lives, these elephants are now tractable, trustworthy, and ready to go to work. There was a fourth old elephant at Garamba when Kes Smith first arrived there, but after 40 years in captivity, she ran away and has since had a calf. Her bid for freedom touches a chord in everyone, but in fact, her and her calf's future depends very heavily on these, her captive sisters. Garamba gets very few tourists. Those who do make the effort to get here have an extraordinary experience, straight out of the old Africa. But the argument goes on. Do we have a right to do this with wild animals? Can there be any justification for taking a noble creature like an elephant and turning it into a glorified tourist bus? Given the alternatives, perhaps there can. To justify its existence as a park, to survive, Garamba needs an income. it can only come from tourism. Many parks have elephant, buffalo and hippo. The northern white rhino can only be seen here, but very few people would come this far to see one. But perhaps they would come for the unique adventure of a ride through the park on elephant back. Garamba's unique attraction is these, the allegedly untrainable African elephants. Without these impossible elephants, Garamba has little chance of making money. If it can't make money, these hippos and many thousands of other animals could disappear. Freedom of any kind requires sacrifice. Perhaps, if it could be asked, the animals would agree that the freedom of a few individuals is a small price to pay if it buys security and a future for all the species in the park. To ride an elephant through this wild place is an experience like no other. There is no separation as there is when traveling in a vehicle. You are part of that wildness, part of that great herd. You are riding on one of them. And the Garamba animals are not blasé creatures, accustomed to seeing tourists. They are truly wild, and though unlikely to press home a charge against their tame sisters, things can get exciting. One group is disturbed by the smell of humans. They have memories of poachers, and they run to join the main herd. King Leopold's dream of training elephants in the heart of Africa has survived for almost 100 years. Keeping that dream and Garamba alive has required an enormous act of faith by everyone involved. For their efforts to succeed calls for something close to a miracle. But here at Garamba, they domesticated the African elephant. They have already achieved the impossible. The miracle may take a little longer.
Shortly after this film was made, Zaire was taken over by rebel forces. The park headquarters were looted and all the vehicles stolen. When the Smiths returned to the park, they found many poachers' camps and hundreds of dead animals. When the grass burns in January and the animals have nowhere to hide, the killing will escalate. The new government has yet to make a commitment to conserving wildlife. A full-colour brochure accompanies this survival special. If you'd like a copy, phone 0891 700 525 or send an A4 stamped addressed envelope with 26p postage to Garamba, Anglia Television, Norwich, NR1 3JG.